Hello, I'm Randy Sutton. Welcome to another episode of The Voice for American Law Enforcement here on America Out Loud and also on basically every streaming platform there is. Now, on this show, as you know, I'm a retired police lieutenant, the author of A Cop's Life, and the founder of the Wounded Blue, the national assistance and support organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. And on this show, we talk about all things that are in the headlines about law enforcement and everything from a law enforcement perspective. Here, you get the truth. And I love to bring interesting guests on, and I have one today. With me today is Mary Schultz. She's an attorney in Spokane, Washington, and she is the attorney for former Sheriff's Sergeant Jeff Thurman. And we're going to be talking about a case that is reverberating throughout the police community. Mary, thank you for joining me here on The Voice for American Law Enforcement.
Good morning, Randy. Thank you for having me.
So for my audience, I'm going to read you a headline and then a little bit of the story that sparked me asking Mary to join me on the program today. Spokane County jury awards $19.5 million to former sheriff's deputy and his wife in defamation case. Spokane County has to pay a former sheriff's office deputy and his wife $19.5 million in damages after a Superior Court jury on Friday determined he was wrongfully fired and defamed by Sheriff Ozzie Nosovich. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Nosovich fired Sergeant Jeff Thurman in 2019. In a news conference, the sheriff said he made the decision after an internal affairs investigation, found Thurman used the N-word while on the phone with other deputies, talked about killing black people, and sexually harassed a female deputy. Thurman sued the sheriff later that year, and in his lawsuit, the 18-year veteran of the sheriff's office challenged the characterizations of the investigation. So, Mary, you are the attorney that brought this to trial for the Sergeant Thurman.
That's correct.
Let's talk about this case. I mean, this is, I've seen some cases in the past where awards have been given to officers who have sued their agencies, but this is like the biggest award I've ever seen. So, can we talk about this case? How did it come to your attention? And let's talk about the nuances of this case.
Sure. If you'd like me to just kind of get us underway, this was a client, Mr. Thurman, who came to me back in 2019. The case has a lot of history in terms of the litigation process, but it really originated on June 13th, 2019, which is when Sheriff Knezovich, his name is Ozzie Knezovich.
That wasn't bad. I did a pretty good job on that name.
It was close. There have been worse. Ozzie Knezovich, at that time the sheriff of Spokane County, and literally just retired as of December 31st, held a press conference. And in this press conference, he announced that he had fired Sergeant Thurman, and he also announced that he had fired Sergeant Thurman for not simply using the N-word, but saying over a Bluetooth call emanating from another deputy's car that could have been overheard by the person who reported it, quote, "Let's go out and kill some N-words tonight." So the allegation was that a black deputy had reported overhearing this comment from another deputy's car at a roadside, and that somehow had been hung on to by that black deputy for not very long, but then he began reporting it, and everyone sort of covered it up. I mean, that was really the story. There was another piece of the story, which was that Sergeant Thurman allegedly sexually harassed this female deputy on a helicopter crew, and there was a sort of a sound bite that the sheriff gave about how Mr. Thurman told her he was going to share a hotel room with her and impliedly impregnate her in the hotel room. So that was the way
Is
that
this
the
the
sheriff.
same deputy?
So this is a different deputy.
Okay.
So the thing started with I'll call it the Bluetooth call, right? This investigation allegedly started with the Bluetooth call. And as the sheriff began investigating, he said he began discovering other information about Sergeant Thurman, including this quote unquote sexual harassment, which he described as this hotel room impregnate comment that was made. So this went out to the public. It went out to the nation. It was explosive, as you can imagine. And several days later, I had Sergeant Thurman in my office talking about what to do about this. And that's where the case really got started. From that point forward, Sergeant Thurman was referred to in headlines across the country as the racist sergeant. And that continues to reverberate today. I mean, you can Google his name and you will see all of these various headlines about Sergeant Thurman being the racist sergeant who was advocating for the, quote, killing of Black people. So that's how the story got underway. And we went through literally kind of a 3-year, including COVID period, of developing some very interesting pieces to this story to come to the conclusion that this entire thing, this entire Bluetooth story had been fabricated.
Wow.
And had been fabricated for reasons that are not unusual in employment law. You know, people sometimes get themselves into trouble, and people sometimes realize that if their trouble is revealed, that they could potentially be in jeopardy of losing their job. And so sometimes people who have an understanding of employment law, which this particular Black deputy did, will make statements, will make accusations, accusing people of certain things, and it sets up this wall of protection for them. All right?
Right,
So
right.
in other words, if I claim that my sergeant is racist, if I get myself into trouble, and I know I'm in trouble, but I go and now claim that my sergeant is racist and I overheard a racist statement, I now have put myself into a protected retaliation category where I think that the sheriff can no longer investigate me for what I'm doing wrong. And if he does so, I can claim that this is retaliation for reporting race discrimination. And that's literally what happened here. This story was fabricated in 2018 with 2018 facts. And unfortunately, somewhere along the way, and we can't really tell where it happened or how it happened because the sheriff's investigator did not drill down to this, but the story starts with 2018 facts in the fall of 2018. But ultimately, this Black deputy picks a location at which this happened. And it turns out that the only time that those actors could have been at that location was in December of 2016, literally 2.5 years before. So the 2018 facts no longer fit the 2016 location. Okay, I'll give you an example. In 2018, when the Black deputy says he overhears this comment over this other deputy's Bluetooth at a roadside, well, that could have worked in the fall of 2018 because that deputy was driving a car that had Bluetooth. But once the location was selected, 2016, there was no Bluetooth in the car over which that call could have been amplified.
I see.
Right?
I see. Okay.
The 2018 story had, in the fall of 2018, the Black deputy said, yeah, a couple days after that, Sergeant Thurman came up to me and apologized for making the statement right outside of my roll call at 5:30 in the Valley precinct. Well, once the story shifted to 2016, they were not in the same precinct. That black deputy was actually in a downtown precinct. Thurman was in a Valley precinct. The black deputy was not at roll call in the Valley. And so what you had happen, and these are just two of a myriad of examples where the black deputy had constructed the story to tell it in the fall of 2018 as if it just happened. But when he ultimately picked a location, unfortunately, that location and that event was in 2016, and you could not pound those 2018 facts into that 2016 event, right? We also came up during this period of time, we came up with the actual phone records that showed that there was no call between my client and the deputy in the car. We came up with access records for who was in what precinct. We came up with just a variety of evidence that showed that that call simply never happened.
All right, let's go back to the initial investigation. So the complaint originally began when, in 2019, when this termination took place?
So the story began being told by the black deputy sometime around the late fall of 2018.
Okay. And then that initiated the internal affairs investigation.
No. So the black deputy tells the story in the fall of 2018. He goes to 3 different sergeants, and he tells each sergeant a version of the story with no location, by the way, just that he just overheard this call at a roadside, generic roadside. And then he told each of the sergeants not to tell anyone. So he starts kind of seeding the story, but he's telling the sergeant, but don't tell anyone. And each of those sergeants thinks that they're the only one who's heard the story, and they agree to withhold reporting that. So, this is pretty egregious, but the deputy says, well, I don't want you to tell anyone. I don't want you to tell anyone.
That's pretty. This is a pretty intense investigation now that begins from this, but it shows a kind of a malevolence, does it not?
It does, and let me tell you that the investigation itself was atrocious. So the story begins being seeded in the fall of 2018. The deputy at that point who's seeding the story is got himself into trouble. And I won't get into the specifics of that here, but he's basically in a bad situation. He begins seeding this story, and he continues into the spring to talk about the story, but nobody's supposed to tell anyone. Someone, the president of the Deputy Sheriff's Association Union, finally hauls him in and says this is going to be reported. And that's when the investigation gets underway. The investigation does not get underway until May 8th of 2019. Okay? So now what we ultimately discovered happened is that as soon as the sheriff heard this explosive statement, this Bluetooth statement, he went right to the media. He went to the editor of the local Spokesman Review. The news article that you just read is from the Spokesman Review. He literally went right to the editor, disclosed the statement, and made a deal.
Wait a minute, hold on a second. He did this before the internal affairs investigation was concluded?
He did it literally within 24 hours of hearing the statement.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That little piece came up during the discovery process, where in a myriad of depositions that I took, it began sort of seeping to the surface that the sheriff had at some point gone to the media. And we couldn't really pin down when this was, because the recollections were varying. The sheriff, when I deposed the sheriff, tried to push, he knew that he had been revealed. And so he was trying to push that first meeting with the Spokesman Review editor towards the conclusion of the investigation, but that ultimately didn't work for him. because his own undersheriff testified that the sheriff had told him he went to the media literally on May the 8th, which is, like I said, 24 hours within him hearing this comment.
Well,
So
there, right there, there is that I'm sure is a violation of the department's rules and regulations concerning internal affairs complaints, is it not?
that's exactly right. The internal affairs investigations are required to be confidential. And what we discovered was the sheriff literally setting up a media event to announce what he was clearly going to do a month down the road. Now, at the time, I should back up on that. When he made the deal with the editor gave him a timeline of 2 weeks for the investigation. He said, okay, you've told me this. I'm going to run with this. And the sheriff basically said, no, I don't want you to do that. Give me some time to do an investigation, and then I will give you the first right. I will give you the scoop once this is concluded. So the deal that was made was that the sheriff would have 2 weeks to run his investigation, and then the Spokesman Review would get this grand story. Unfortunately, because this was set up with 2018 facts, they couldn't find the event, right? Because remember, the event didn't happen in 2018. The deputy's story about this roadside at what's called Minnehaha Park, they couldn't find the arrest event for literally over 3 weeks. So the sheriff is sitting there trying to direct this investigation, which he did do. The sheriff actually directed the internal investigation. 2 weeks later, the sheriff can't find a roadside event that correlates with the black deputy's story. So the newspaper calls him, one of the reporters calls him, we get this through the press officer's deposition, says, hey, how about that investigation? We're going to run with this story. And the sheriff gets on the line to the editor and says, call that off. We're still in the investigation. He does not tell the editor that they can't find the location. They're finding all sorts of things about this black deputy misrepresenting a myriad of things. I mean, they're literally showing that practically everything this deputy said in his original interview can be disproved by objective evidence. But they can't find this arrest event for this really explosive Bluetooth statement. So the sheriff is given some additional time by the editor to come up with this thing. And, 2 weeks later.
This is true collusion on their parts. True collusion.
Well, we have a lawsuit against the newspaper.
Beautiful.
As well.
Good to hear.
So let me tell you what happened here. So as we hear that there is this collusion going on, and we can't figure out when it started, we subpoenaed the newspaper to a deposition, the editor. So the newspaper comes into the action and requests that the subpoena be quashed. The trial judge says, no, you're going to sit for that deposition. It is material to this case when this kind of correspondence between you two began. So the newspaper then appealed that ruling. Now, once you get into the appeals court, if you have a privilege issue, you're just stuck. The appeals court is going to accept that. They're going to accept what's called it on an interlocutory basis, which means that they're going to accept review before they require that the privilege be waived or in some cases overrun. And we were never able to get that appeal concluded before this case came to trial. So we did not get the specific information from the review. So what we did is, while this was up on appeal, I went ahead and just filed a lawsuit directly against the newspaper as a party. Now I'm suing them for defamation. So then I sent out discovery in that case. And this gets complicated, but Washington had just passed this law that can prevent lawsuits against what is called public expression. It's a new law.
Oh boy.
I don't know if you've ever heard of an anti-SLAPP statute.
No, this
But
is news to me.
Okay, so they passed this law that became effective last July. Actually, sorry, the July before, while this was in progress. And the newspaper, the publishing company, requested that the case be dismissed based on this law. The judge in that case ruled, no, we're going forward with the defamation case. I don't think the law applies. The newspaper appealed that decision, which they can do under the statute, and that case is still up in the appellate court. So we had to go to trial without any of the actual correspondence between the sheriff and the editor. But what we had was the undersheriff, who is now our sheriff, by the way, testifying that Sheriff Knezovich had gone to the news on May the 8th.
Wow. That's a big deal.
And so that held during the trial. We were able to use that and to work with that, and then basically to just go forward to the call that was made to the press officer to 2 weeks forward when they finally found the location. And Randy, just so you know, they found the location literally, they found the location on June the 3rd, right? The investigation started on May the 8th. They found this mini ha-ha arrest event on June the 3rd, almost a month later. And at that point, as soon as they found the location and the sheriff realized, oh my God, we're not going to be able to fit 2018 facts into a 2000, he literally shut the investigation down. He told the investigator, wrap it up. This stops here. Deliver it to me. Even before they interviewed Sergeant Thurman. Before they interviewed Sergeant Thurman for his Loudermill hearing, the sheriff shut the investigation.
So he did. So there was no conclusion to the investigation like an exoneration would normally do from the facts in an internal affairs investigation. He just stopped the investigation?
Well, no, he concluded. He stopped the investigation and then he concluded. So he stops the investigation on June 3rd, when he gets word that this is now a 2016 event. Uh-oh, we're in trouble.
But he'd already fired the sergeant by then.
No, he had not. The investigation is still ongoing.
Okay.
Sergeant Thurman is fired on June 13th. So on June 3rd, they find the date. They realize we've got a problem. The sheriff shuts down the investigation. The internal affair guy goes ahead and interviews Sergeant Thurman the next day for the first time and tells him for the first time, oh, by the way, this didn't happen last fall. It happened on December 22nd, 2016 in the interview. But the investigation's already been closed. The investigator wraps up the interview, delivers his investigation to the sheriff, who makes all of the findings and sustained the findings.
Sustained the findings.
Sustained the finding that this Bluetooth call had been made. Sustained a finding that Sergeant Thurman had, quote, sexually harassed this female deputy, which was sort of almost like a sideshow as part of this, and then went public. On June 13th at 12 noon, which was the time set for Sergeant Thurman's Loudermill hearing, he delivered a letter instead because he heard the media was already there. The sheriff sustains all the findings, issues the press release that was already in progress for a couple days, and sets up his press conference for that afternoon. So this took place literally within hours. Sergeant Thurman is emailed that he's fired at 12:35, and the press is already out. The Spokesman Review already has it. They'd received a press release at 12, I think it was 12:25.
So the newspaper knew that he was fired before the sergeant knew that he was fired.
Pretty much, yes.
Wow.
Pretty, pretty much, yes. I mean, it literally is within minutes. We have the email chains that show how this all came down on June the 13th. And I don't know if you've watched the press conference. Have you been able to
I
watch
have
the press
not. I
conference?
have not.
You really should. I hate to invite anyone to look at it, but it is. I called it a stunt in the trial in closing, and that's literally what it is. The manner of the way that this was done is what not only as you put it, the malevolence, the intentionality aspect of how this came down, but the manner in which this man was fired, the public, egregious manner in which he was fired is what drove those damages, because it absolutely devastated him and his wife.
Oh, I can't even imagine that. Plus it puts him in danger. It puts his family in danger by putting that out into public. So I mean, not only did it destroy his career, it could have led to violence towards he and his family.
He and his wife have actually moved to an area where they're just not available because of some of this, and because of the extent of the coverage. You have to remember 2019. This was an explosive time, and it was the environment and the dynamic that the sheriff specifically intended to take advantage of. At that time, there was word that he was intending to, run for governor of the state of Washington, and he clearly saw that he had a political future. And this statement, as fabricated as it was, presented an opportunity for him.
Amazing. This is
And he took that opportunity.
right. Right. All right. So let's go back now. Did the Sheriff Deputies Association, did they come to you? Were they part of the defense? Did they back their deputy?
Short answer is no. The Deputy Sheriff's Association. So the black deputy was part of that association. He had been on its advisory board, and when he began to make this more of a formal complaint through sort of being hauled in by the Deputy Sheriff's Association president, he actually got the Deputy Sheriff's Association president to, quote, represent him. I asked about this in trial, in deposition and in trial. Well, why is he entitled to representation by the union president when he's not the accused?
Yeah.
And the answer was, well, because he asked. And I said, well, I think you need to tell me more about that, because that's really not a satisfactory reason. The accused is Sergeant Thurman. Why are you not representing Sergeant Thurman? Oh, well, he had some representatives, and he did. They were varying, as Sergeant Thurman would put it. One day it was this person, the next day it was this person, but they literally did nothing. They did not ensure that any of the collective bargaining agreement was followed. They did not ensure that Jeff Thurman's rights were protected during the process. They did not assist him in any way. And that's one of the tragedies of what happened. They simply allowed this to roll right over him. I think, again, because of the explosive nature of this,
Okay,
and that's what really.
There are so many questions that I have here. I mean, I think we could talk about this for a couple of hours, really. So it was determined at trial that the deputy who initiated all this fabricated, lied, was untruthful. Correct?
Well, what was determined at trial was that the sheriff repeating that deputy's claim was knowingly false. And as part of that, the jury would necessarily have determined that that statement had been false from the outset. I mean, we spent a lot of time in trial showing how that story was simply fabricated and transparently fabricated. It didn't take a rocket scientist to understand, that it didn't fit. None of the facts fit.
Was
So
there
as
ever
part of the,
was there ever an internal affairs investigation into untruthfulness towards the deputy?
not at all. There were so many issues with that deputy, and this took a lot of airtime at trial. There were so many issues with that deputy making false statements during the course of this internal investigation. There were so many blatant false statements being made, and not once was that deputy confronted. Not once was he noticed. Not once was he investigated. And this was the basis of the race discrimination claim that is part of the verdict as well. This verdict includes a reverse race discrimination claim that the jury found for Jeff Thurman on as well. That while Jeff Thurman is being subjected to this investigation, the deputy who is accusing him of making this statement is repeatedly making false statements, one after another, without any ramification to him whatsoever.
Did you call that deputy as a witness?
The county did. The sheriff called him as a witness.
So in his testimony, how was that testimony received by the jury?
Well, you'd have to look at the verdict.
Okay, yeah, I think that says it all. And still, even though this trial takes place, even though it is determined that he falsified this report, there's still no internal affairs investigation against him.
Well, here's a fun thing. So, as I mentioned, this deputy was in trouble when he started this story. And as I explained to the jury ultimately in closing, he was just trying to get out of Dodge without being fired. So at the time he concocted this story, he was also applying to other police agencies because he wanted to lateral transfer out of the department. This was really being used, in my opinion, as a protective means. It was to give him time to get out of the department before his misconduct was revealed, to laterally transfer out to the Spokane Police Department, to which he had applied, before he got fired, so that he could transfer in good standing. And in fact, he was hired by the Spokane Police Department, unbeknownst to the Sheriff's Department, while this was going on. He'd applied formally to the Spokane Police Department in March of 2019, 2 months before this investigation started, and they accepted him in June 2019, right after this investigation concluded. So he was out of the Sheriff's Department by July of 2019, and he had started with the Spokane Police Department. Now, he is no longer with this, well, details are vague, but what we do know is that he has been on administrative leave from the Spokane Police Department since July, I believe it's July of 2022, for some misconduct issues, and I can't get into those. Those were issues that were excluded from trial. We do know what went on, but that's not something that I can talk about. The end of the story is that he's now on administrative leave. The black deputy is on leave from the Spokane Police Department for certain misconduct issues.
Okay, let's get to the verdict. So tell me what it was like. I mean, so the case is concluded. It goes to the jury. How were you feeling, and how was the sergeant, the now former sergeant, feeling about how the trial went? when you concluded the case and you're waiting for a jury verdict?
So with any verdict, there's always high anxiety. You can feel like the case went extremely well, and we did feel that way. But once the matter goes into the jury room, you don't have any knowledge of how the jury is truly perceiving things. So it's always an anxious time. We felt that the case was presented in a manner that was clear and simple and very powerful. The sheriff took the stand and testified, and there was really no threat there. Let's put it that way.
I like
But
the way you
again-
put that.
But again, you're dealing with a community that's elected this sheriff time and time again. This was the fourth time that he had been elected. And I think people have an innate desire to believe that their elected officials are truly doing the best for them. That's what they elect them for.
Right.
That's what they expect. And they would expect that the sheriff would be telling them the truth. And so you always have that. We just have to wait. And so we did. But
How long were the
interestingly-
deliberations?
Yeah, we didn't have to wait long. The jury went out, I think it was on a Thursday afternoon, around 3, I think so. And of course, they would have to select their foreman and all of that, and they left at 5. They came back the next morning, and we got the call at around 1 o'clock. So it did not take them long.
That's a really fast verdict.
For this level of damages and these different 4 claims, absolutely.
So, okay, now
You know,
set
and
the stage. Set the
One of the
stage.
things that I wanted to tell you, Randy, is that sometimes, in closing, you have an opportunity to go through the instructions with the jury, and I did that here because instructions can sometimes be confusing. They'll get hung up on a word or something. And so when we're waiting for the verdict, we're always sort of waiting for the questions. A lot of times the jury will ask a question of the judge, and the judge will get you on the phone. I took the opportunity of closing to kind of go through these instructions and to explain to them how those instructions really led to our conclusion. And I think that helped them in deliberation in terms of the timing, that they were able to really sit down and get right to it, and clearly they did.
Okay, set the stage for me. You're waiting. You now know there's a verdict. Sergeant Thurman, his wife, are in the courtroom with you, and the verdict is announced. Tell me how that went, and tell me about the how it was received by Sergeant Thurman and his wife.
So we're sitting in the courtroom. He is next to me. His wife is next to him. They're holding hands as they did through most of the trial. They're, locked together as supporting each other, and we're just waiting for whatever comes. The judge receives the verdict and begins to go through the causes of action. We, the jury, find number 1, did the sheriff defame Jeff Thurman? Yes. And as soon as that first yes hit, Jeff Thurman just physically clenched and reacted so thankfully. Just hearing that first yes on defamation.
I can just imagine. I can see it in my mind's eye.
I grabbed his hand and held his hand, and the judge went to the next. Do you find that the sheriff placed Sergeant Thurman or presented Jeffrey Thurman in a false light? Yes. Do you find that the county engaged in intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is otherwise called outrage? Yes. Do you find that Spokane County and the sheriff engaged in race discrimination against Jeff Thurman? Yes.
Wow.
All four. All four. What do you find
Amazing.
Sergeant Thurman's damages to be? Past wages, $480,000. Future wages, $2 million. Non-economic damages, $12 million.
Oh my God.
Jeff Thurman just, I mean, I think we all just sort of melted into this ball of thankfulness for this jury, for, the way that they saw these damages. And then they went on to, do you find that Casey Thurman was damaged by loss of consortium? Yes. And she is just crumpling. What do you find her damages to be? $5 million.
I think that you must explain loss of consortium. I think probably that's a term that is rarely used outside of the law, the law community. If you would explain that, please.
Sure. So what happens when a spouse is injured is that the relationship that you have with that spouse changes in very material ways. Before, the relationship was this way. Your husband is a protector. He is confident. He is strong. He is the patriarch of the family, the husband, the father, all of these things. And it deserves a note here that Jeff Thurman, when I first met Jeff Thurman, I felt his honesty when I first began talking to him. But I had no idea of what a hero this man truly was for the community. I mean, his law enforcement career was just extraordinary. And so this was the man that Casey Thurman married, who managed and oversaw and protected the family. Well, when this happened, that man changed dramatically. He became someone entirely different. He lost that confidence, that bravado, that strength, that protection. Casey talked about him trying to kill himself, literally taking a gun out of his hand. The constant fear when she would text him and he wouldn't text back, what has happened? The constant belief that he was going to kill himself, taking things from his hands, pills, weapons, coming home and seeing him coming around the garage with a shovel, with a weapon, and asking him, what are you doing? And then finding out that he had selected a place to kill himself. So she testified about the impact, the very different man that she's married to now. And that is loss of consortium. It's loss of your spouse's companionship, their connection to you, their role to you, their intimacy with you. It's all of those things that a spouse loses when they're dealing with an injured spouse.
I can imagine that testimony must have been so incredibly powerful to the jury. I mean, it sends a shiver down through my body to hear that. I can imagine that people that are unaccustomed to the law enforcement community and the way of life must have been really, really startled and impacted by that testimony.
Without question. And again, hence the verdict. We had a lot of psychological testimony in this case. We had neuropsychologists who testified about the damage that had been done to Jeff Thurman, cognitively, as well as psychologically, from the stress, the destruction that this conference, that this continuing media attention and denigration of him was causing. So we had a lot of psychological testimony in the case. And then we had Casey, who really was able to put into real life what this destruction meant, what it manifested as day to day And it was striking. You know, she wasn't on very long. Her testimony took not much over, maybe I think an hour and a half. But that's all it took because of the power of the examples that she provided. You know, here is what my life is now.
Yeah.
This is what my life is going to be.
I bet the county attorney didn't have many questions for her.
The county attorney chose not to cross-examine her for obvious reasons. I mean, he made a good call on that.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, if he did, it'd probably be a $40 million verdict. So
well, and sometimes folks don't understand, you know, that. Well, gee, she only testified for an hour and a half, and you know the trial was about Jeff Thurman. One of the things that people sometimes don't understand is that in order to have loss of consortium damages, you have to prevail on the primary defamation, right? So if Jeff Thurman had not prevailed on defamation, on race discrimination, then there would have been no loss of consortium claim. It would have been mooted.
right.
So the entire trial really went to the wrong that had been done to Jeff Thurman. And once that wrong is confirmed by the jury, then they go on now to look at what is Casey Thurman now left to live with.
Right.
And they made the right call on this one.
Well, we're running out of time. I really wish this was a 2-hour show because I could talk to you for another hour about this. But let's say that there was a happy ending here. As much, I mean, I know that Sergeant Thurman would rather just be a cop again and wish that this never occurred in his life. That money will never compensate for that. But at least the sheriff is gone. His political career is done. He's no longer employed as the sheriff, and my guess is his political career is finished, which is to me that's a happy ending. So, do you concur with that?
Well, we don't know that, Randy. Strange times.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't know. I mean, the media has interviewed the sheriff on his way out. There's a recent article where they asked him, do you have any regrets? And this was not one of them. So
Too bad he couldn't be held personally liable.
Well, he is an individual defendant, and I agree with you. We sued him as an individual defendant, but when you do something like this, it's the county that's going to be picking up the bill
Right.
for this. So, but we hope that, ultimately what Jeff Thurman really wanted was just the restoration of his name and the recognition of his service to the community. He really would prefer to be back in the helicopter and back in the patrol car, but unfortunately, because of the nature of these things, he's not going to be able to do that anymore. So he's going to have to find something else. And it's undoubtedly going to be, directed towards something I think similar to what you're doing with your fund, with your, assistance to veterans with PTSD. I think his feelings are moving in that direction, and I hope that he follows that.
As do I. Please give him my personal and my professional regards, and you and I will talk offline about how we might be able to assist him. But I can't thank you enough for coming on. Your interview here was amazing. I think you explained so well the nuances of this terrible case, and I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join me here on the Voice for American Law Enforcement. Mary Schultz, attorney in Spokane. Thank you, and congratulations on this amazing victory.
Thank you, Randy. You take care and keep doing what you're doing.
I will. Thank you. Well, I tell you, that was amazing. So before we go, there's 2 things I want to tell you about. thinbluedefend.com, which is an incredible app designed to save the careers of law enforcement officers. It is we need to proactively, when you're a cop, you need to proactively plan for surviving your career. And use of force is first and foremost on everybody's mind when it comes down to surviving a police career. You want to give yourself all the possible benefits. And Thin Blue Defend does that. It's an app that was created by a Georgia Bureau of Investigation use of force investigator, amazing guy, and he created this to help save careers. It's not expensive. Every department ought to have it and give it to their cops. But in the meantime, you need to get it for yourself. Go to thinbluedefend.com. And also, what we just heard about in this interview, here is all of this media attention being thrown at this police sergeant or deputy who did nothing wrong. And yet he is and his family are placed in danger because of these allegations. And I guarantee you doxing was going on. Officerprivacy.com, amazing product that helps to remove the ability to find and locate and get personal information about a police officer. They actually go into the internet and they remove the ability to dox you. And I had no idea how easy it was to find people and get really, really private information until Pete James, who created officerprivacy.com, showed it to me. And let me tell you, if you're a cop or have been a cop, you want to get this officerprivacy.com service. It's not expensive. It does amazing work. Go to officerprivacy.com and find out about it. So the last thing I want to talk about is how we end the show. And unfortunately, the way we end the show is with End of Watch. And here we are at the beginning of a new year. It's not starting off great. Excuse me. The end of the year and the beginning of the year. So we eulogize those men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice. Corporal Ray Hamilton, Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office in Florida. Corporal Ray Hamilton was shot and killed during a barricade at the 710 block of North Park Boulevard in Wright, Florida. Deputies had responded to the apartment at about 9 a.m. to investigate a domestic assault that had occurred the previous night. The suspect refused to exit the home, and the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office Special Response Team responded to the scene. The man fired out of a window at 12:40 p.m., striking Corporal Hamilton. He was transported to the hospital where he died several hours later. He'd been with the Okaloosa County Sheriff's for 5 years. Corporal Ray Hamilton, Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, Florida, End of Watch, Saturday, December 24th, 2022. Deputy Sheriff Isaiah Cordero, Riverside County Sheriff's Department, California. Deputy Sheriff Isaiah Cordero was shot and killed while making a traffic stop in the Jurupa Valley area. Deputy Cordero was approaching the vehicle he had stopped when the driver pulled out a gun and opened fire on him, fatally wounding him. A citizen who witnessed the shooting called 911 and rendered aid until deputies arrived. Subject fled the scene, led officers on a vehicle pursuit that spanned multiple counties. The subject's vehicle became disabled, and he was then shot and killed after he opened fire on the officers. He had an extensive criminal history, had stabbed a California Highway Patrol canine in 2021. At the time of his murder, Deputy Cordero's murder, the man was out on bail even after having been arrested for failing to appear while awaiting a mandatory 25-year life sentence. Deputy Cordero served the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for 8.5 years. Deputy Sheriff Isaiah Cordero, Riverside County Sheriff's Department, California, End of Watch, Thursday, 29th December 2022. And Chief of Police Justin McIntyre, Brackenridge Borough Police, Pennsylvania, was shot and killed near the intersection of Brackenridge and Morgan during a foot pursuit of a wanted subject. The man was wanted for probation violation involving weapons and had fled from the Pennsylvania State Police during a traffic stop the previous night. After shooting both officers, two officers were in foot pursuit. He killed the chief of police. He carjacked a vehicle, fled into the city of Pittsburgh, where he was shot and killed by Pittsburgh police. Chief McIntyre had been sworn in as chief of police exactly 4 years earlier. Chief of Police Justin McIntyre, Brackenridge Borough Police, Pennsylvania, end of watch Monday, January 2nd, 2023. May they rest in peace. This is the end of our show for this week. I'm Randy Sutton, the host of this program. You can find me on Facebook at the Voice for American Law Enforcement if you want to help the Wounded Blue, and I certainly request that you go onto thewoundedblue.org, check us out, and see how you can help. If you are an officer who is in need of help, we exist for you. Go to thewoundedblue.org. I'm Randy Sutton. Thanks for joining me again here on AmericaOutloud.com.
111, 110.